Welcome back to DevCraft Project. In today's build, we're creating a newsletter sign-up page with success message using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Here's the final project in action. If I click subscribe without entering an email, we see an error message. Now when I enter a valid email and click subscribe, it shows a success message with the confirmation details. That's what we'll build step by step. Let's start by setting up the project. On the desktop, I'll create a new folder and name it Newsletter Signup Page. Inside this folder, I'll drag and drop the images folder that I downloaded earlier. If we open it, you can see there are two images that we'll use in this project. Now, I'll right-click on the Newsletter Signup Page folder and open it with Visual Studio Code. Inside VS Code, I'll create three files: index.html, style.css, and script.js. Inside the index.html file, I'll quickly add the boilerplate code by typing Shift+1 and pressing Enter. That gives us a complete HTML structure. Next, I'll open this file with the live server extension so we can see changes in real time. I'll also split the screen into two, the code editor on one side and the browser preview on the other, so you can clearly follow along. Inside the head section, I'll update the title to Newsletter Signup. Right below that, I'll link the style.css file so we can start writing our custom styles. Inside the body, I'll first create a main card that contains the sign-up form. This will include the heading, a short description, a list of benefits, and the form itself with an input field, error message, and a subscribe button. Alongside that, I'll add a card image section. Below the form card, I'll also set up the success message section, which will display after a successful subscription. Finally, at the bottom of the body, I'll link the script.js file so we can handle all the interactivity with JavaScript. Now, moving to the style.css file. At the very top, I'll paste in the root color variables that I had saved earlier in Notepad. These variables include the background gradients, text colors, accent colors, shadows, and borders. Defining them here at the start helps us maintain consistency and avoid repeating color codes throughout the style sheet, making the workflow much easier. Below the root variables, I'll add the global reset using the universal selector to remove default margins, paddings, and set box sizing, border box. This ensures consistent styling across all browsers. Next, I'll style the body. I'll set the font to Poppins, apply the background gradient from our variables, and center everything using Flexbox. I'll also give it full viewport height and some padding so the layout stays responsive. Now I'll move on to styling the main card. I'll give it a semi-transparent background with a blur effect using backdrop filter. Then I'll set up a two-column grid layout, one side for the content and the other for the image. I'll also add rounded corners, a subtle border, and a drop shadow to make the card stand out. Finally, I'll apply a small rise animation so the card smoothly appears on load. Inside the card content, I'll add generous padding and set the text color to light for better contrast. The main heading will be styled with a large font size, and I'll apply a gradient text effect using WebKit background clip and WebKit text fill color, transparent. For the paragraph, I'll reduce the opacity a bit to give it a muted look and increase the line height for readability. Next, I'll style the benefits list. Each list item will have a custom checkmark icon using the before pseudo element, a soft color, and a little spacing to keep the layout clean and professional. Now let's move on to styling the form elements. We'll start with the labels. Each label is displayed as a block element so it always sits on its own line above the input field. I'll give it a slightly smaller font size of 0.9 rem, make it bold for emphasis, and add a margin at the bottom to create spacing between the label and the input. For color, I'll use the light text variable so it stays clear and readable against the dark background. Next, let's style the input field itself. The input will span the full width of the form, so it aligns neatly with the other elements. I'll add comfortable padding on all sides to make it easy to click and type into. For the borders, I'll use a subtle semi-transparent color from our root variables and round the corners with a 12px radius. That keeps the design consistent with the rounded look of our card. To make it more modern, I'll give the input a slightly transparent background so it blends with the glassmorphism style of the card. The text inside the input will be light-colored for readability, and I'll also add a smooth transition effect on focus, so any changes feel natural. Placeholders, I'll style them with a softer gray color. This way, the placeholder text looks different from the actual input value and doesn't confuse the user. Finally, when the input is in focus, I'll remove the default outline and instead highlight the border with our accent red color. Along with that, I'll add a glowing box shadow to really draw attention to the active field. This small touch improves the user experience, making the form feel interactive and polished. Next, I'll style the error message that appears when someone tries to submit the form without entering a valid email. The text color will be set to our accent red, making the error immediately noticeable. I'll keep the font slightly smaller at 0.8 rem so it doesn't overpower the rest of the content, but still stands out enough to catch the user's attention. To ensure it always has some space below it, I'll add a 1 rem bottom margin. I'll also display it as a block element and give it a minimum height. This way, even when there's no error showing, the layout won't suddenly shift. It keeps everything stable and smooth. Now let's move on to the button styling. The subscribe button will take the full width of the form so it looks strong and prominent. For the background, I'll use our gradient accent that transitions from pink to blue. This adds energy and visual appeal. The button text will be white, with bold font weight and a clean 1 rem size, making it easy to read. I'll also add some padding to make it tall and clickable, and round the corners with a 12px radius to match the input fields. To keep things modern, I'll remove the border completely and instead rely on the gradient background and shadows for styling. The cursor will change to a pointer on hover, clearly indicating it's interactive. For the hover effect, I'll add a subtle animation. When users hover over the button, it will slightly move upward by 3px, and a glowing box shadow will appear beneath it. This gives the button a dynamic, tactile feel, like it's lifting off the page when you interact with it. These small details make a big difference in how polished and professional the final project feels. Now let's create a second version of our button, the dark button. This will be used later inside the success message card. For the base style, I'll give it a solid dark background using our text dark variable. This keeps it consistent with the theme, but visually different from the gradient button we styled earlier. On hover, I'll make the background just a little lighter, changing it to a medium gray. That subtle difference is enough to give feedback to the user that the button is active, while still keeping the professional dark theme. Now let's work on the card image. This is the section on the right side of our sign-up card layout. I'll set the background to an image located in our images folder. The image will be centered and set to cover, so it always fills the space without stretching or leaving empty areas. To make the image pop, I'll add a brightness filter set slightly above normal. This brightens up the image just enough so it complements the text content on the left side, balancing the overall design. This combination of a clean gradient button, a simple dark button, and a polished card image helps make the entire sign-up form visually engaging and balanced. Now I'll move on to styling the success message card. This is the pop-up that appears after the user successfully subscribes. First, I'll set the background color using our successBG variable. This gives it a semi-transparent dark layer that blends well with the overall glassmorphism design. To enhance that effect, I'll also add a blur filter of 15px, which creates that frosted glass look. Next, I'll control the size by setting a maximum width of 480px. That way, the success box never gets too wide on larger screens and stays neatly centered. I'll add generous padding of 3 rem all around to give the content breathing room, and then round the corners with a 20px radius for a softer, more modern feel. A subtle card shadow is also applied to lift it visually off the background. Since this is a confirmation message, it should look calm and easy to read. I'll center all the text, set the color to our light text variable, and give it a clean overall look. By default, the success message should remain hidden until it's triggered. For that, I'll set the initial opacity to 0 and slightly shift it downward using transform. Translate Y, 40px. I'll also add a smooth transition of 0.6 seconds so when it appears, it animates nicely instead of just popping into view. Finally, when the class show is added with JavaScript, the opacity transitions to 1 and the transform resets back to 0. This creates a smooth slide-up effect for the success message, making it feel polished and professional when the user completes the subscription. Now let's style the content inside our success message. Starting with the heading, I'll set the font size to 2 rem so it stands out clearly, and add vertical margins to give it some breathing room above and below. This makes the success title the first thing that grabs the user's attention. Below the heading, we have a paragraph that explains what the user should do next. I'll add a bottom margin of 2 rem to separate it from the dismiss button that comes after. I'll also increase the line height to 1.6, which improves readability and keeps the text looking clean and spacious. Now let's focus on the checkmark icon at the top of the success message. I'll give it a background color using our accent red, which contrasts beautifully against the dark, frosted background. Inside, the checkmark itself will be white, bold, and centered. To make it feel like a badge, I'll add some padding and make it perfectly round using a 50% border radius. The font size will be 1.2 rem, just big enough to be noticeable without overpowering the heading. To give it some depth, I'll add a glowing shadow effect with shadow icon. And finally, to add a little life, I'll animate the icon using a bounce effect. The animation runs infinitely, alternating every second, so the checkmark gently moves up and down. This subtle motion helps draw the eye toward the confirmation and gives the design a polished, interactive feel. Now I'll add a few utility classes that we'll use to control visibility and animations throughout the project. First is the .hidden class. This simply sets display none. It's a quick and easy way to completely hide an element from the page until we want to show it again using JavaScript. For example, the success message starts with this class applied so it doesn't appear right away. Next, I'll define 2 animation helper classes, .fadeIn and .slideUp. Both of these will start with opacity 0, making the element invisible at first. The .fadeIn class triggers a smooth fade-in keyframe animation that gradually makes the element visible and brings it into place. Similarly, .slideUp triggers a slide-up animation, which not only fades the element in but also moves it slightly upward as it appears. These little touches make the transitions feel much smoother and more engaging. To make these work, I'll also define the keyframes. For fade-in, the element transitions to full opacity while resetting its transform to translate Y, 0. For slide-up, the behavior is similar. It fades in while sliding upward into its final position. Together, these animations create subtle but effective entrance effects that make the UI feel more polished. Finally, I'll add a media query for smaller screens. When the viewport width is 768px or less, I'll adjust the card layout by switching from a 2-column grid to a single column. This ensures the sign-up card stacks vertically, making it easy to read and interact with on tablets and mobile devices. With this small change, the design stays responsive and user-friendly across all screen sizes. Now I'll move on to the JavaScript file. The very first thing I need to do is grab the elements from my HTML that I'll be working with. For this, I'll use document.getElementById. Let's go through each one carefully. First, I select the form itself by its ID, signup form. This will allow me to listen for the submit event whenever the user clicks the subscribe button. So I'll store that in a variable called form. Next, I need the email input field, which is where the user actually types in their email address. I'll grab it with the ID email and store it in a variable called email input. Having direct access to this element makes it easy to check its value when the form is submitted. Along with the email input, we also have an error message element that will display a warning when the email is invalid or left empty. That's the element with the ID error message. So I'll select that as well and keep it in a variable called error message. Now let's handle the two main states of our project. We have the form card, where the user enters their email, and the success card, which appears after the form is successfully submitted. I'll need to toggle between these two views using JavaScript. So I'll grab the form card first with its ID form card and store it in form card. Then I'll grab the success card with the ID success card and store it in success card. Later, I'll use these two references to hide one card and show the other at the right moment. Inside the success card, we're also showing the user's email address so they know exactly which email they subscribed with. That's an important detail for user feedback. So I'll select the span element with the ID user email and keep it in a variable named user email. Later, once the form is submitted, we'll insert the actual value of the input field into this element. Finally, I'll grab the dismiss button. This is the button that allows users to close the success message and return to the sign-up form if they want to try again or enter a different email. It's identified by the ID dismiss btn, and I'll save it in a variable called dismiss btn. So far, all we've done is select the important elements from our HTML and assign them to variables in JavaScript. Now I'll handle what happens when the user actually submits the form. To do this, I'll attach an event listener to the form that listens for the submit event. I'll use form.addEventListenerSubmit and pass in a callback function. Inside this callback function, the very first thing I'll do is call e.preventDefault. This is a critical step. By default, submitting a form would refresh the page, and in our case, that would reset everything we've built so far. Preventing the default behavior gives us complete control to handle the form logic with JavaScript without a page reload. Next, I'll grab the actual value the user typed into the email field. I'll do this with email_input.value.trim. The trim function is important here because it removes any accidental spaces before or after the email. I'll store this cleaned up value in a constant called email. Now we can start validating. The first check is very simple. Is the email field empty? If the user hasn't typed anything, we don't want to proceed. I'll use an if not operator email condition for that. If it's empty, I'll call a function named showerer and pass in the message email field cannot be empty. After that, I'll return immediately to stop the rest of the code from running. If the user did type something, the next step is to make sure it's in the correct email format. For this, I'll call another function isValidEmail. This function will check the string against a regular expression to verify if it looks like a valid email address. If the email doesn't match the pattern, I'll again call showerer, but this time with the message valid email required. And once again, I'll return immediately so the rest of the code doesn't execute. If the code passes both of those checks, meaning the email field isn't empty and the format is valid, then we're good to move on. First, I'll take the user email element inside the success card and set its text content equal to the email value we just captured. This way, the success message will actually show the user's own email. Next, I need to switch from showing the form card to showing the success card. I'll do this in two steps. First, I'll hide the form card by adding the .hidden class to it. Then, I'll reveal the success card by removing its .hidden class. Finally, to make the success card appear with a nice smooth animation instead of instantly, I'll add a little delay. I'll use setTimeout with a very short delay of 50 milliseconds. Inside the timeout, I'll add the .show class to the success card. This .show class triggers the CSS transition we defined earlier, fading and sliding the card into place. The result feels smooth and polished, giving the user clear feedback that their subscription was successful. Now I'll add the functionality for the dismiss button inside the success card. This is the button that lets the user close the success message and go back to the form if they want to subscribe with another email address. I'll attach an event listener to the dismiss btn and listen for the click event. Whenever the button is clicked, the first thing I'll do is remove the .show class from the success card. By doing this, the success card will no longer be visible with the animation. But I don't want to instantly hide the card because I want the exit animation to play first. So I'll wrap the next part of the code inside a set timeout. I'll set the delay to 500 milliseconds, which is just enough time for the fade out and slide down animation to finish smoothly. Inside this timeout, I'll add the .hidden class back to the success card, completely removing it from view. Then, I'll make the form card visible again by removing its .hidden class. Finally, I'll clear the email input field by resetting its value to an empty string. That way, the form looks fresh and ready for the user to type in a new email if they want. Now I'll create a helper function called showerer. This function will be responsible for displaying any error messages when the email is missing or invalid. It takes in a message as a parameter. Inside the function, I'll set the text content of the error message element equal to that message. This makes the error text appear right below the input field. To make the error even clearer, I'll also highlight the input field itself by changing its border color to a bright red. This visual feedback helps guide the user's attention directly to the problem area, so they immediately know what needs to be fixed. Finally, I'll add another helper function called isValidEmail. This function will check if the user's email address is in the correct format. It takes in the email as a parameter and uses a regular expression, or regex, to test it. The regex I'm using here is a simple pattern to check if an email is valid. In plain words, it makes sure the email starts with some text, has an @ symbol, then a domain name, and finally ends with a dot and an extension like .com or .org. If the email doesn't follow this structure, it won't be accepted. Alright, the project is complete. Let's test it out and see everything in action. First, I'll try to hit the subscribe button without entering an email. As expected, we immediately get an error message right under the input field, telling us that the email can't be empty. The input box also highlights in red, so the error stands out clearly. Now let's type in an incorrect email format, something like hello@com. When I hit subscribe again, the system catches the mistake and shows another error, this time telling us that a valid email is required. This way, users are guided to enter the proper format before continuing. Finally, I'll enter a correct email address, for example www@email.com. Now when I click subscribe, the sign-up form smoothly disappears and our success message card slides in. It shows a confirmation check icon, a thank you message, and the exact email address we just entered. This gives clear feedback to the user that their subscription was successful. And if the user wants to dismiss this message, they can click the dark dismiss button at the bottom. When I press it, the success card fades away and the form resets, ready for another email. And that's it for this project. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more builds here on DevCraft Project. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.